My name is Helen Berry, and I'm a member of the steering group for Greater Manchester Housing Futures, which is an action research partnership looking at what community-led housing has to offer in situations of neighbourhood decline and gentrification, specifically in the context of Greater Manchester. So this is the fourth event, and our three events since April have looked in turn at housing cooperatives, co-housing, and at community land trusts, which are the main models we refer to when we talk about forms of housing which are community-led. Housing Futures is producing a desk-based review of existing knowledge, as well as undertaking primary research, in order to make a series of stakeholder-specific recommendations in a report to be launched in December this year. We have also been feeding into the Greater Manchester Housing Strategy Review, which is being led by the Salford City Mayor, Paul Bennett, who will be speaking at our report launch on Saturday, the 8th of December. Over the last year, we've also been building a local network of groups and organisations around community-led housing, and we're working with a small consortium of organisations to set up a regional hub for Greater Manchester, which will be able to offer advice, support, and support groups to access community housing fund and to signpost them to further support. The first meeting of that hub, which will be a cooperative consortium, will be at our launch event in December, and in parallel with a number of workshops for other interested parties and members of the community. When you arrived, you should have picked up some information about this and about our other remaining event, which is taking place on the 1st of November, and that will be looking at what countries in the Global South can teach us about how to do successful community-led housing. The other paper on your share details support being offered by the Greater Manchester Combined Authority to community-led housing projects which are located in any of the 10 boroughs. So if you have a spark of an idea or belong to an existing co-op or community which can expand with the right advice or finance being available, please use the link on that sheet to get in touch with this project, which will in turn link with the Greater Manchester Hub when that is up and running. And also I just wanted to mention that given the audience in this room, some of you might also want to use that link to offer your services as a paid advisor. That's going to be done through the same link. So turning to the plan for this evening, which we have designed in order to place the evidently rapidly growing interest in community-led housing into a wider political context, and invited three speakers tonight, who are Rebecca Long-Daly, who's the MP for Salford and Eccles, and Shadow Secretary of State for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, which is a longer title, I think, in the Cabinet. And she, along with John McDonnell, commissioned the Alternative Models of Ownership report in the title of tonight's meeting, which has generated so much interest since it was launched in June last year. Then we'll have Neil McElroy, who's the Chief Executive of the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, often referred to just as CLES, and he's a leading commentator on public policy matters and one of the contributors to the Alternative Models of Ownership report. And then finally we'll hear from our housing expert, Stephen Hill, who's chair of the UK Co-Housing Network and a board member of the National Community Land Trust Network, and who has 40 years of direct involvement in the development of policy and practice around the self-organised housing sector and community-led neighbourhood regeneration. There'll be time for a few questions, probably not to Rebecca because she has to leave and go to another meeting. And then we'll move into a panel and audience debate where, as chair, I'll put in a series of questions to Stephen and Neil based on key issues arising from our research so far, and then invite you all to participate in that. At 8:30 we'll need to wrap up, but the discussions can continue at the Moon Under the Water pub for anyone who'd like to join us there afterwards. That's the Wetherspoons the other side of St. Peter's Square, so you can just follow the route if you don't know where that is. Lastly, if the fire alarm goes off, we'll need to leave calmly through this door here, and you will find toilets out in the foyer on the right near where the tea and coffee was fed. So, to us for being here.
Thanks. And first of all, I'd just like to thank you for inviting me today. And obviously, as you've heard, John McDonnell and myself commissioned a report, and we launched it at last year's Labour Party conference called Alternative Models of Ownership, to start the discussion about how we can really diversify the way that we look at businesses and the way that businesses are made up. And there were a number of reasons for doing that. And I think, for me, one of the important points to underline all of that is that for too long, we've had Britain's economy rigged in the favour of a wealthy elite, and private property ownership has been allowed to dominate. We've had disinvestment, uneven geographical development and financial insecurity dominating many of our communities. In fact, the Economic Justice Commission recently produced a report, it was commissioned by the Institute of Public Policy Research, and they stated that Britain was the most regionally unequal country in the whole of Europe. And that's absolutely staggering. And you can see why when you look at the levels of investment that areas down in the southeast receive compared to areas in the north. We think that inequality is becoming endemic across many of our regions, unfortunately. And the housing crisis exemplifies this inequality. Only this morning I was on Radio Manchester talking about some fantastic regeneration that's happening within Salford and about the rehousing of particular tenants and the fact that they couldn't be rehoused anywhere else while the work was being carried out because there simply aren't enough homes. And it's one of the most common casework issues that comes through my office door as a constituency MP. The number of people who are living in insecure private rented accommodation, poor rented accommodation, riddled with damp on the walls, a place that's not fit to call home, people who are homeless, who are on the verge of being homeless, and there are thousands on housing waiting lists across Salford, and I think 1.3 or 1.4 billion nationally on housing waiting lists. We're in the midst of a housing crisis. We've heard all political parties talking about it, but we hear very little in terms of action. How do we solve that crisis going forward? But home is meant to be the heart of our lives. It underpins our social well-being, our ability to aspire. A safe, warm, secure home underpinned many of the principles that the Labour Party stood for in the 1940s when we set out the welfare state. The Beveridge agenda set out the need for a real place to call home that was secure, that didn't look different from other houses on the street of differing levels of income. Well, that seems to have been lost somewhat, despite Theresa May's pretences this week that she wants people to supposedly be proud of their council homes. I mean, it's absolutely laughable. And then you look at the levels of investment that she's actually prepared to provide housing associations with in order to make these homes fit for purpose. But for too many people, the housing pressures they face are getting worse. Britain's housing system is broken, and the average home now costs 8 times the average annual salary. So whereas in my parents' time, it might have been possible to aspire to save and own your own home, for many of the young people growing up today, that's a pipe dream. They're resigning themselves to a lifetime of renting, but not secure renting, not a home for life, insecure tenancies where they don't know from one week to the next whether the landlord might sell the property and kick them out. They might have children in a school nearby, those children affected by that insecurity and not being able to set down roots. But we can't accept this, and we can't allow it to continue any longer, and the time now is to find a cure. Now, post-war reconstruction proved that the public sector could provide quality homes for millions of people. Yet the tragedy of Thatcher's right to buy unpicked this proud legacy, having precisely the opposite effect of what it claimed. I can't do a speech without having a rant about Margaret Thatcher. It's no different. And now we're in a state of affairs where home ownership's fallen to a 30-year low. And we've actually got the lowest level of house building since the 1920s. The 1920s, that's absolutely staggering. And these figures reveal why we need to find a new model of housing. And we've already set out, John Healey, our housing minister, has said that we're going to build 1 million homes under a Labour government, and at least half of those are going to be council homes. Well, that won't be enough. And we know that we need to look at other models, other cures to help us navigate through this difficult time. And we also need to recognise that until we do have a Labour government, and please God that will be soon, but we need to prepare ourselves locally and take as much action as we possibly can, which is why I'm so pleased at the initiatives that's been put forward tonight. Now, there are many alternatives to private ownership, not just in regard to housing, but also in relation to business and industry, from the local level to the national level. But in order to do this, we've got to address the big challenges facing the economy. We've got to confront the lack of long-term investment and tackle stagnant productivity. And another staggering statistic that I like to quote is that we're in a period of stagnation in relation to productivity. We've not experienced a period like this since just after the Napoleonic Wars, even before we even had industrial revolutions that we go to the Museum of Science and Industry and look at. That's absolutely staggering. We really are in the midst of a productivity crisis. So we've got to reset our economy, but we can't just reset it and improve that productivity and put it in the hands of a wealthy few. We've got to make sure that it's put back into the hands of the many, not the few. And that's why the discussion about alternative models of ownership is so important. Now, it's not right, economically effective or socially just that the profits extracted from vital public services continue to line the pockets of shareholders. This obsession with big business being able to run everything is an illusion, and we saw that this year with the collapse of Carillion, how the rug was pulled not only from under public services, but across businesses in our region, those smaller businesses in the supply chain who relied on Carillion providing them work, late payments up to 160 days in many cases. There was no social responsibility on the part of Carillion to deliver those public services, and the government had to step in and try and mitigate the crisis that was caused. So there's an increasing acceptance that instead of improving the efficiency of public service provision, privatisations damaged service quality and facilitated the ciphering of public money for profit. Now we know, I'm probably preaching to the converted, but we know that many of these services will be better run when they're directly accountable to the public, in the hands of the workforce responsible for their frontline delivery and in the interest of the people who use and rely on them. Yet the Tory government continues to deny this and continues to pursue a model of private property ownership to the exclusion of everything else. It doesn't matter that it's more economically viable or cost effective to provide a service within the public sector, whether that be housing or clinical services within the NHS. There's this pursuit of privatisation, an ideological agenda that drives this, that isn't in the interest of many of our public services and many of our communities. There are fundamental flaws that flow directly from the predominance of private property ownership, which undermine the economic strength and well-being of our society. And these deep structural flaws won't be resolved gradually or fixed through technocratic policies. We've got to look ahead and come up with radical new solutions. We need a fresh approach, and that means investigating who owns our economy and asking, actually, in whose interest is it run, as well as exploring ways in which we can improve it by working together. So it's therefore necessary that we examine a variety of models of ownership going forward and to control productive enterprises, not to, push business out. And I always make the point that we're diversifying our business environment, and those public services that we know will be run in the collective interest of the public should be run in the collective interest of the public, and the public should have a hand in deciding how those services themselves are run. One example of collective ownership itself has the ability to increase employment stability and increase productivity levels. It also ensures that firms are more democratic and guarantees that economic prosperity is not concentrated in certain regions of the country. I was talking about public services generally, and slightly kind of going off topic from housing here. Well, there's a lot of discussion in relation to Labour's nationalisation plans to bring certain public services back into public ownership. And what I want to reiterate to people is that constantly in the press we hear that we're being taken back to the 1970s, that there'll be a shadowy organisation at the top that controls everything, whether it's water, rail, housing, and all the rest of it. That is not what's central to our agenda. Democracy is what's central to our agenda. And around the world we're seeing examples of the positive contributions of national ownership and the different models that are available. But in the UK, national state ownership has historically tended to be centralised, which is why people make these assumptions, and the power has been placed in the hands of a private and sometimes corporate elite. But we've said quite clearly that we're committed to bringing rail, energy, water and mail back into public ownership. But we're also committed to putting democratic management at the heart of how these industries are run. And there's a piece of work ongoing at the moment in relation to democracy, which hopefully you'll all be able to get involved in due course when it's announced, where we're asking Labour members and people as part of the wider Labour and cooperative movement to dictate to us what would they like to see in terms of democratic ownership going forward. How do they think they should have a stake in those public organisations so that they can make sure that they're as fair, transparent and as efficient as they possibly can be. Now, we're hungry for a new economic model, one which prioritises the shared values and collective goals, which is why we want to catapult into 21st century public ownership. And it's not just a case of looking at, renationalisation in the old form, cooperatives in one particular genre. This is about examining all of the new and radical forms of public ownership, and I know you're going to hear from some fantastic speakers tonight. But ultimately, underpinning all of that is about making sure that we don't have an economy that's run in the interests of the few. We have an economy that represents the interests of the many, whether it be housing, making sure that people feel that they have that security, that they as a community can control investment in their housing area and dictate what their community should be enjoying, whether it's in relation to automation, because that's a big issue on the agenda at the moment. Do we make sure that the profits of particular industries are increasingly siphoned into the pockets of shareholders? Or do we make sure that automation, through public ownership, actually benefits those who work in those companies? That they can go to shorter working weeks if productivity increases and efficiency increases due to these technological changes? We won't be able to do any of that unless we discuss these different forms of ownership. And I know that you're going to do that tonight, and I'm sorry that I'm going to miss the rest of the contributions because it sounds like it's going to be a very exciting event. But just to say, I am so pleased that we are leading on this in Greater Manchester. We've always done that. Whenever there's a problem and we haven't got what we want from government, we're always trying to find out what we can do ourselves, and we're renowned for that in Greater Manchester, and that makes me proud to be a Salfordian and a Greater Mancunian. Thanks very much.
I was interested in what you said about finding out who runs our economy and whose interest is it in. And I just wonder how we can practically do that, knowing fine well that those forces who have lots of resource behind them will go to extreme lengths to make sure that it's very difficult to track where the money's going and where it's coming from. And if we know that investments are happening that are not in the interest of the country but more in the interest of individuals, how we can, I guess, go about challenging that in a way that we can get some real traction for the country to get us back to what most of us would like to see, which is a better society.
Yeah. No, that's a very good question, and it's very difficult. And we'll be looking at that in terms of housing. For example, if you get in touch with the land registry about a particular property, if it's a person that owns it and they live in the UK, it's quite easy to find out who they are. If it's owned by a company that's offshore, for example, you'll have no idea who owns the property, and you won't be able to get any details from the relevant tax, offshore place that they've registered themselves in. And that's why we're doing an awful lot of work on tax avoidance and forcing this, register of interest and ownership within these tax dependencies, so that we are in a position to be able to find out who landlords are, so that if they aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, or local authorities need to intervene in some way, they'll at least know who to get in touch with. And another example of that is on the high street. We've got, empty shops, for example. And one thing that, we've suggested from the Labour Party is that there should be, and this has been advocated by different reviews, the second Grimsey review on the High Street talked about this. Mary Portis, member with the ginger hair who did the High Street Town Centre stuff, she's talked about this, about making a register of landlords, so that local authorities have a clear register of landlords, and it's like a legal right to report that you own particular properties. So if it's empty, it's dilapidated, it can be used for other uses, for example, the local authority or whoever else might be interested will be able to directly engage with that landlord and do something about it, but that takes direct action from government, and then we'd have to legislate to do that. You can't expect these things to just happen voluntarily, because they're not, are they?
Question at the back.
On the subject of empty houses, for example, right now there's 226 empty houses in M9, boarded up, have been for more than 12 months. Annoys me to the back teeth, because I'm constantly trying to find houses for your people.
Yeah.
You don't see the local authority very keen on using their empty homes property powers or compulsory purchase, because it costs them money, it's too much.
Yeah.
I want to see Labour government say, we will give charities, housing cooperatives and non-profits the right to apply to the courts if something's been empty for longer than 12 months, to get an order on it, to take it over.
Yeah, and
That's
that's...
out the local authority, because the local authority don't have the funding, they don't have the interest, they don't have the will.
Yeah.
So let's give the sector that wants to do it the legal right to go, we want to do it, give it us.
No, I completely agree, and it's something that John Healy, our shadow housing person, has been working on. And I'm not the expert on these things, but I know that there is an examination of this use it or lose it principle. So if there are boarded up properties for a long period of time, then there is the opportunity. I'm not sure if it extends to housing associations, but I'll check that point, so don't quote me on that, but I'll feed it back to John.
Thanks. We've got time for one very quick point if it's good.
There's a lot of anger in Salford in particular,
because of the fact that the Salford City Council, the councillors and the land officers in particular, are seen to be in bed with the private property developers. And in point of fact, I think the University of Manchester did have an event a week ago which looked at how developer-led urban regeneration has more or less been given a free hand, particularly in Salford, which has led to a lot of inappropriate development of very expensive housing that has ended up pricing out Salford locals. I mean, so much so that now the average price of a house in Salford is 137,000. And I think the Salford Star did run a very recent article saying that a nurse on a starting salary of 23,000 will have to save for 17 years to get a deposit on a first-time house.
So what's
Well, how is Labour going to win that trust back? Because the Labour Council has allowed developer-led regeneration to take place in Salford, and there are a lot of people on the ground who are very angry and who are prepared to throw the Labour Council out, and then they will.
Yeah, I mean, in Salford, I think the issue that we've got, obviously I can't speak as a spokesperson for the council, because obviously I'm not from the council itself, but the issue we've got is that we have seen a lot of development, a lot of flats around the quays and in Odsall, and people living nearby see all of these, fantastic new flats kind of springing up, and they see very little happening in their communities. They don't see social housing being built in their communities. And, what I would say is that I'm not against, new developments, fantastic flats, but at the same time, we have to have social housing, and what we need is a massive, bold and radical council house building programme, and we need to fund local authorities and housing associations and cooperative projects such as this one to be able to do that, and we're not seeing that from government at the moment, and we're in a situation where, you know, as I said earlier, we're trying to make the best of a bad situation and come up with ideas for community-led projects. We shouldn't have to do that because there should be a massive fund provided by government to deal with this housing crisis.
Thanks very much for
Thanks
that.
a lot.
So I'm now going to pass over to Neil McInroy, who was going to talk about the political space for alternative models in the post-industrial north.
Good evening. Hello. I'll make far regional accents, obviously. An accent like me, which hasn't got a brilliant accent. Eh? Never lose it. It's great, isn't it? You know what I mean? It's brilliant. You're going to get some Scottish brogue here. And I'm knackered, so I'll get you broad like to go on, so I apologise for that. My accent was born in the Highlands, educated in Glasgow, and messed up in Manchester. So, thanks for the invite. It's brought me here today to share this movement you're building here. So that's good. Thanks for the invite, and hopefully I can contribute something to it now as we're moving forward. I'm Neil McInroy. I'm the Chief Executive of the Centre for Local Economic Strategies, with the UK's leading member and research organisation dedicated to progressive economics for people and place. We're based here in Manchester, across the UK and Europe. And we've got one abiding mission. It's to change the political economy of the United Kingdom and anybody else that wants to listen to us. That means that we believe that the economy is went bad. Yeah, very bad. We take our inspiration of the economy from the Greek word oikonomos, the root of economy, which means kind of keeper of the household. We believe an economy is a social construct. Fancy word there for 20%, a social construct. It's something that we create. We can make the economy. But what's happened, of course, is that we meant to fit into the economy that's made by somebody else. So we need to bring the economy back home, literally back home, right back to our hearts. It should be something that's an endeavour that we make an economy that we want, yeah, not that somebody else does. That's our mission. I'll tell you a joke. 3 types of economists. One that can count and one that can't. I got a bigger laugh in Belfast as well. We are a weird think tank in that we think and do. We're not one of these think tanks that comes out of policy reports that MPs and people can read. We try to do stuff. We're practice to policy as much as policy to practice. So we take inspiration from stuff that's happening on the ground and try then to put that into either a local authority or a national policy field. I'm going to do 3 things. I'm going to just broaden out the ideas and touch on things that Beck touched about the current political and economic context within which community housing sits. I'm going to talk about the rationale for ownership in its broadest sense, a plural ownership. I think that also Beck ownership, not just the state and not just private, a plural set of ownership, and why that's really important for this bringing the economy back home. And talk a little bit about how do we gain traction here. You know, we've got a juggernaut of market liberalism. How can we slow it down, stop it? You know, a little thought about what we've got to do as a room. Does that sound alright? And you'll shut me up in 10, 12 minutes. Isaac shuts up. I get carried away. I probably do want to sit down because I've really wet feet. Anybody else got wet feet? Oh, I think that. Yeah. Right. The first thing to talk about here in terms of this broad now is that I'm optimistic. Who's optimistic? Warriors. By the end, you're more optimistic. Hopefully. There's a growing consciousness. I'm lucky I get to travel lots of different places across Europe and Britain. You know, this week I've been in Birmingham, Belfast, last week Edinburgh, and I'm going to Auckland in a few weeks' time. When I go to these places, all I see is people like you who are doing stuff, who are trying to change things. They're doing things in spite of the system. And what we say is, why do we have the system that supported it? We'd be cooking on gas. So I'm optimistic. There's a growing consciousness that come out in the global financial crisis. It kind of, the mask slipped. Nobody's in charge. The whole thing's a mess. The mask slipped and we're all going, aha! Well, some of us kind of knew that anyway, but mainstream people are going, oh, not mainstream people. Everyone kind of knows, you know. Even my brother who's a Tory kind of knows it. Yeah, he's going, oh, that's no good, them bankers. I would tell you that. Yeah. You know, so there's a growing consciousness, and that's a brilliant thing. And we're at the end, the beginning maybe of that. You know, that's the first Churchill quote and only one in the beginning. So people are fighting back. There's movements across lots of different environmental movements, housing movements, economic movements, co-op movements. They're all growing and they're all getting people coming around and rallying. People are no longer tolerating the intolerable. I know. So, we're saying that we're in this interregnum. There's another funny word for what this is. Interregnum. Who knows what interregnum is? A bit of what, I don't know what it is myself. Interregnum is a space where there's something about being born, but it's not born yet. It's something that's starting to emerge, but it's not right to be formed. It's a paradigm shift moment, a zone of transition. Gramsci talked about this interregnum, Italian communist. We're in that moment. We are in the interregnum. All these little sounds are coming together, but they're not quite together yet. And that's how we need movements like this, because it's starting to bring people together and ideas together, so we can actually create something that is the new. The defining issue, I think, that underpins this conversation here is about wealth and ownership. And I'm fascinated by wealth. Who has it? Where does it go? And how do we get our hands on it? And for all the great work that gets done on poverty, we know poverty. Oh man, you just put studies of poverty, millions of stuff, with no dimensions, shapes, where it is, who has it, what poverty. Wealth? We have no idea. It's hidden. So wealth is the defining quality of an economy, what the movement, what we're trying to do, wealth and ownership. And there's fascinating things about wealth. Where does it go? Here, this city, lots of wealth. Where does it go? There's a Scottish phrase, scoosh. It means sliding away. It scooshes away. Where does it go, all that wealth? Well, it's going to speculators, investors, off the Cayman Islands, shareholders. None of them probably here. It's not hitting the streets of Hugh Lord Gordon, it's scooshing away. We need to make that stick. Okay? And that's how different forms of ownership that's linked to that place, linked to the people, linked to the hearts of people. That's how we counteract that wealth that scooshes away. There's 5 things unpicking the issue of wealth. First is growth is, people say, don't you, economic development, people say, growth, trickle down. We know that doesn't work, yeah? Growth goes up, poverty is a bit like that. Growth is detached from poverty. They're not connected, they're disconnected. So we need to link it up. There's some mental facts say the 10 richest men in the world own the same amount of wealth as 50% of the poorest in the world. So it's 10 men in the same amount is 3.5 billion. 10% of the richest in Britain hold 50% of all the wealth. The poorest 50% only hold 9% of the wealth in the UK. And 1% own more than 20 times the wealth of the poorest 20%. This is not just, oh, it's a bit bad, isn't it? It's an abomination. The reason why there's poverty is because wealth's been extracted at an unprecedented level by a few. And we need to stop that. We need to create reservoirs, locks and burns that make sure that wealth flows through people's lives. And that's where things like community housing comes in. People say, traditional left people say, oh yeah, so it's reinvent the welfare state and redistribute it through tax. You know, that traditional argument. And there's a bit we can do with that. But it won't be enough. And you know why? Because capitalism's matured. When the welfare state was formed, we knew where capitalism was. We knew how to tax it. We knew where they were. And there was a contract built between citizens, the state, and business. Corporation tax was paid readily. Businesses have hearts too, of course. Now, we're in an era of neo-liberalism, market liberalism, where easily we don't know where the capitalists are. Yeah? And aligned with the state, they're extracting the wealth. So we can't just say, oh, let's just have redistributive policy and that'll be enough. No, we need to go even deeper. We need to actually create an economy which functions virtuously, not just you get growth and then you redistribute it. The very act of how the economy works needs to be closer to our hearts. And that's where community-led housing comes in. Unionisation's been eviscerated. The lack of collective bargaining, all that's a problem with wealth too. Rebecca touched upon it. The labour market. I was in a big distribution centre recently in Scotland. One of those distribution centres, when you're driving past it, you go, oh, there's that. And like 2 minutes later, you're still driving past it. Massive big shed, right? Flipping huge. And I had one of these tours. Right. Yeah, see robots moving about. Okay. I asked the guy who was showing us the tour, what's your R&D for the different types of robots? And he goes, oh yeah, we've got great plans for more robots. Yeah, we're going to automate that bit and this bit. And I'm going, oh, you'll be employing less staff then for the people of Fife. Yeah? And he goes, oh no, I'm not sure of that, no. Of course there will. There's going to be less jobs. Now, traditionally, money has come to us through the wages. If there's no any jobs, how do we get wealth? We're going to have to own more of the means of production. Otherwise, we're going to be poor people in perpetuity, and misery in perpetuity. It's not just a political project, it's a social necessity for decency to have a plural set of ownership of the means of production. And again, this is where community housing is so important. Planning. Planning used to be a tool to create great places. It was an enabling context where Pat McGuinness, the Scottish planner, he's seen places as systems, and you need all the things connected to create great places. And he was a planner. Planning now is a tool to facilitate capital to come in and for capital to leave. It's a vehicle for capital and investment. So planning is fundamentally important. We need to change how planning functions. So 2 questions. One is traditional redistribution. Yeah, I think we need to think about that, but it's limited. We need to think about a more profound ownership of the economy. Not after the fact of growth. Not a social contract that this is the big thing, the sky and Whitehall, and then redistributes to poor people. Something that's much, much more powerful, with more deeper community and local ownership of certain elements within the economy. We need more entrance into the market, because at the moment it's fundamentally rigged. It's rigged in favour of the few. We need to have this plurality of forms to allow the diversity of human life, but also to ensure that there's not one monolithic process that extracts the wealth. Local is important here. In a global world, the global economy is, globalisation is a good thing in terms of us being interconnected with lots of people around the world. Yeah? The global economy isn't though, because it serves just a few. The local really matters. And what I love about the local is, it conflates some of the things. It means there's an authenticity. There's a chance for people to bump and mingle and share and collaborate and commune. The local is a very important thing here. There's an identity that comes from local. There's an authenticity that comes from local. So an economy that has more of a local element to it, that counteract that global economy, I think is very important. Also, democracy is important. Democracy itself has become a tool for global corporations to utilise. we need to bring democracy back home as well. Ada Colau in Barcelona, the mayor of Barcelona, where we do some work, she says politics is an agora, not a temple. She means that politics is a space that we all come into, not the town hall. Yeah? Democracy is something that we do, not that we. It's something that we engage in, not something we just do in terms of ballot box. So this idea that politics and democracy is so fundamentally important as well. How much time have I got? Is it alright? Am I ranting on? Too high, man. What was that? Right. I get that President Scott thing. I say this all the time. Did you get it? We when our shoulder says you're shine. You know, you know, it's a horrible thing. It's a cross you've got to bear, but it's better than being a big glorious bastard, isn't it? So I'm going to just talk about a little bit about our own work at Clay's very briefly on our local welfare. You probably heard the Preston model. You heard of it? Who said the Preston model? I'm sick of the back teeth here. 6 years work, trying to get people interested in it for 6 years, and all of a sudden one Guardian article and everybody's flipping flooding in. Do you know what I mean? I was on, so much so, I was on the Jeremy Vine show 3 weeks ago. Flipping Jeremy Vine show. What? Followed by a Burmese python. Jeremy Vine's a nice guy actually, I have to say. But, I'm being big glorious now. I know Jeremy Vine. Anyway, that whole work, and it's not just Preston, the Preston's been covered. We're now working in Kirklees, Birmingham, Oldham, Salford, London Borough, Islington, Wirral, 10 European cities, Barcelona. We're also working with NHS England and the Health Foundation, looking at the power of health institutions as anchors. How workforce, supply chains, how can we make sure that is virtuously social in the economy? So it's a growing movement. I don't want to bang on about that, but there's one key thing to that movement. It's new municipalism. It's a sense that there's local authorities, local areas, saying we are going to create an economy that works for the people. Barcelona is the poster child of this, so you need to go on this big time here as well. Final thing is, it said, how do we get a movement to grow? And I had some thoughts on this when I was over there today. We need to know who to blame. I get audience like this, people speak to it, and it's like, yeah, it's a city council, Manchester City Council, bastards. Combined authority, or it's like, or you say like, oh, it's that, they bought that RSL, bought it home, nasty. Well, that, yeah. It's not them. It's not them. It's the system. It's the market and big government. It's them to blame. So when you're trying a movement, you need to be very careful about who you start to blame. Certainly somebody's just going through the motions and going back, we need to call that out. But call out the real people to blame, which is the market. Manchester City Council's doing the best in a crap situation. So soft. I don't think you should blame them. Blame the real people. Blame the neoliberals. Don't blame them. They're just trying their best in a crap situation. Second thing is the trigger. In our movement, in the Preston work, it's been like, the trigger is this dawning realisation that there's injustices being done. There's something really intolerable being done. And that trigger, when you see that thing, and you see other people get interested in that thing that people are getting annoyed at, jump at it, because that's the medium, that's the entry point to your movement. The real burning sense of injustice, homelessness, well. The third one is evidence. What's the true story here? Go beyond the injustice, but how is it manifest? What's the causes is important. So we've got who to blame the right people, the trigger, evidence, and collaboration. With the lesson of Preston and new municipalism is, this is not about vainglorious leadership. The means to a movement are important as the ends, they infect the ends. And if you're a movement for social change, it's no Hannah or Isaac or somebody saying, here is the way forward. It's everyone. It's suspension of hubris in this leadership and I know I'm the big man or woman. Yeah? It's about solidarity, collaboration and working with your brother and sister. That has to be the means that we hold dear. And some so-called progressives, usually in London and usually granty left wing, sometimes I'm suspicious of them, because I think actually your ego's too big, mate. Calm your ego down and let other people in. Yeah? And England's plagued by that. There's something in England DNA I said that just look for the big leader. Maybe it's Henry V thing, I don't know. Yeah. The fifth thing is patience. You don't stop the juggernaut by waving in front of it saying stop, because it'll run you over. You've got to slow that juggernaut down bit by bit, then eventually you can get in the caveat and drive it somewhere else and break it up and create something different. You've got to have patience with this. Preston 6, what years work. Sixth thing to say is we need traction, and Labour have now set up the Community Wealth Building Unit. I think that's really important. I think we need this wider context, and that's how great of Rebecca tonight for that contextual frame. The final thing I would say is that, very finally, that there's a guy called Roberto Unger, who's a Brazilian philosopher and politician. Roberto Unger says this is the age of experiments in this interregnum. It's trying stuff. Trying it, getting small wins. I was speaking to Steve there earlier. Get that little housing thing you're trying going and working. 2, 4, 5, 6 units. Get it going. And sing to the rooftops about it. Yeah? Showcase it. And then that experiment will grow. It's a tipping point. It'll be exponential. That's try stuff. And I see in this moment what we are. We've got all this horizontal energy. Yeah? Lots of plural people doing great stuff as part of this movement. Where we are in the theory of change at this point in time is this is starting to grow. But vertical power is not yet been affected. We need to do more and more of this and then route vertical power to it, and then we really escalate. We're not there yet, but that will be the goal. Thanks so much for listening. Well, that's all.
After we've heard from Stephen, he's going to focus in on housing and what alternative forms of ownership and community-led initiatives can offer in the context of a housing crisis.
Good evening, everybody. You might wonder why I brought this. As a Londoner venturing to Manchester, this is neither defensive or offensive. But it does play a rather important role in the story that I'm going to tell. It's also a rather handy pointer. And essentially, I just wanted to say something about this title. Never let good political slogans go to waste. Taking back control and better together. People often ask for, what is the definition of community-led housing? And there's an awfully long, boring, 3-part answer, which you really don't want to hear. About control, management, participation, all those things. Actually, I think it's a very simple definition, and it's been alluded to by both Rebecca and Neil, is that citizens are coming together to provide the housing for themselves and their communities that neither the market nor the state is offering. The better together is that they have to do this together with other people, and as far as possible they should be doing it with the state. Sometimes the state is not a very willing partner, unfortunately, and it depends all sorts of things about the extent to which they do. But crucially, these things are really important because I think the state, as Neil has already referred to, the state is powerless in many respects, but citizen and state working together can achieve things that neither can do on their own. So then, here's your logo. And it's great. I've never seen it before. Our homes are not your assets. It's a kind of very great and robust statement. But I'm going to suggest to you during the course of this evening that it's not robust enough. And actually the situation is worse than you imagine it is. So, 4 years ago, I was very fortunate to go on a Churchill Fellowship to the US to look at the community-led housing projects there. And what I was looking at was the nature of the relationship between community groups and their local state about why they were collaborating to do community housing projects. What was in it for the politicians in a country where mostly American politicians don't have anything to do with affordable housing or state-provided housing. The market decides everything. And for communities in a country where there has always been much more autonomous community and citizen action, what were they getting out of it through their collaborations? My very first evening, I arrived late in Boston, 3 hours late. I had to go straight to a public meeting with people I'd never met before, with all my baggage for 2 months of travel, in a not terribly salubrious part of South Boston. So I had no idea what I was going to. When I arrived, this was a big public meeting, and essentially it was a kind of talk show for people who were soon to be homeless. There's an organisation called Vida Urbana, City Life, which basically provided a place where people who were about to be made homeless through eviction or foreclosure on their homes, and it was a place where they could come and tell their stories. And so members of the audience would come up, tell their story about what was happening to them in their lives, and at the end of it, they are then connected with advisors from Harvard Law School to see how they can at least make their landlords or their mortgage companies go through due process so they're not out on the street tomorrow. But in some cases, postpone eviction, postpone foreclosure. Now, I'm actually going to give this sword to Neil. So you are one of these people who has just told their story. And the compare at the end of the storytelling, and before the person goes off the platform to get their help, is challenged. Will you fight to stay in your home? Yes! Yes. Now you all shout, and we will fight with you. So can we do that again? Will you fight to stay in your home? Yes! And we will fight with you. Right. And you can have another chance to do that at the end, right? I want a bit more. Okay. But the important thing about that event was that the kind of people who were there were just people like you. They were black, they were white, they were middle class, they were working class, they were young, they were old, people in employment, people past working age, all in situations where their lives were very precarious and were being ruthlessly exploited by either the landlord or the mortgage companies. Mortgage lending is much less regulated in the States than it is here. And what I got from talking to people in the audience was a sense that all the lessons of the financial crisis in 2007 had not been learnt. So although these mortgage companies had their fingers burnt with the foreclosure crisis, when things came back to normal a bit, they had worked out that they could play the system much more effectively than ever before. And essentially, all of us here in this room, and people like us around the world, we are the assets. We are their assets. Because without our name on the mortgage contract or the tenancy, there is nothing to exploit. The moment we are in occupation, we are the asset that can be exploited. So mortgage lenders typically want to recover their debt, but the way in which they force people through repossession processes means they end up with all the equity as well. It's a ruthlessly exploitative system. And it was a real eye-opener, which really coloured all the rest of my visit to the States and the things that were happening there. Over on the west coast, Oakland City, just over the bay from San Francisco, not a desperately attractive city, and up until now been kind of rather working day place, but now it's a city where it's receiving loads of people, ordinary middle class people who can no longer afford to live in a much wealthier San Francisco. But the immediate effect of the foreclosure crisis was a moving in by 3 or 4 international vulture funds. Now, all these little sort of homey notices about housing you see on lampposts and telegraph poles, and these are all basically, they all go back to about 3 companies which ruthlessly exploited all the people who were in trouble, bought up properties, started investing them out to wealthier incomes from San Francisco, and were displacing mostly African Americans from poorer neighborhoods and repopulating them with better off people, and then ultimately selling them off at huge profit. So the housing market, it's a war out there. That's what they say in the States. We would say, oh, that doesn't happen here. So here we are, in London, overheard recently in London. One surveyor says to the other, busy? Busy? So busy. And basically he's busy making money for developers, making sure they don't have to pay for affordable housing in their planning applications. And the two people who run this are a chartered surveyor and a chartered planner, and the little thing that you end up with at the end is go on a nice holiday with the money you save. Now, I'm a surveyor too. I think this is a disgrace. I think this is a fraud against the public interest. This website has now changed, and box 6 now says, and now you can get on with the project. That's not where they started. Here again, big project in central London, Haygate Estate, some of you probably heard, at the heart of Elephant and Castle, a lot of community resistance there. And at one stage, one of the people who was resisting a CPO on his leasehold flat insisted on seeing the viability calculations which made the whole development justified. And he found that it was not possible to get it. He went to the Information Commission and the High Court, eventually got a decision. And it turned out that not only had nobody in the public ever seen this, none of the councils in Southwark had seen it either. So what were they doing in their democratic role? On the left here, Shell Centre, a very large development, so big that it was outside the scope of the local plan. When the planning application went in, it had to go to a local public inquiry. And a campaigner on this subject about violating planning was challenging the developer on the amount of money he said he could afford to pay for affordable housing. He was paying for a little bit, but really not very much at all. The QC for the developer was saying, oh no, we really haven't got enough money. During the course of the hearing, this campaigner received anonymously a PowerPoint of a presentation by the developer to city investors. And one of the things you do when you do your planning appraisal is you calculate how much money you're going to make from selling one of the properties. So there was one figure in the planning documents, and rather unsurprisingly, there was another figure in the PowerPoint to investors. Would anyone like to hazard a guess about how big the difference was?
20 times.
Huh?
20 times.
20?
20 times bigger.
Well, just a kind of an amount of money. £1 million?
70 million.
More? More? Huh? 50 million? 300 million. And the QC jumped up. Of course they're different. They were. Dead white. So there you are. Haygate Estate, one of the big issues here has been displacement and gentrification. University of Leicester have been doing some really interesting work mapping where people went to. These are the tenants and how they were displaced to all sorts of other parts of the borough. There's another map for leaseholders whose compensation meant that most of them had to move right to the very edge of London or outside London altogether. Another big estate regeneration project. This is redevelopment of the Earlscourt Exhibition Centre in a big area around there. Hammersmith and Fulham Council, when they were under Tory control, sold an option to the developers Capco on 2 estates for £100 million, which means the developer can call for those 2 estates to be empty any time it's choosing in the next 20 years. It's a complete political disgrace. The tenants here have mounted a kind of a counteraction. They're trying to exercise the right to transfer regulation so they become the landlord of their own estate. It's a complicated story, I won't go into it now, but in the sense that the campaign has meant that actually they are now in a very strong position. So they've been doing a lot of, we will not be moved. This is a bit like New York in the 1950s, Robert Moses and City Council clearing a lot of areas, we will not be moved. And the people around here saying, or Spear, who's a property developer, or Hemsley, and if you've got really sharp eyesight, or Trump Senior. But the point is that by maintaining a campaign, lobbying both central government and the new Labour Council, and with the market having now turned in London, this developer is in real trouble and is looking for a way out. So the community have, by sustaining their action, have helped contribute to the discomfort of the developer, because any other investor is very wary about now getting involved. On a much more positive note, this is another project in London, an NHS hospital site. I'm sure you've got big NHS sites here. NHS Mental Health Trust needed to sell part of their site in order to re-provide better facilities on the other half. They got permission for 450 homes, being the most that they and the council thought they could get away with without getting a lot of local opposition, but only 14% had affordable housing. Community said 14% is not enough. They started their alternative plan, started the St Anne's Redevelopment Trust. They came up with a proposal for 800 homes with at least 75% affordable housing. And they then mounted a political campaign to persuade the Mayor of London to buy the site from the NHS, which they did at the end of this March. He's got a plan for 50% affordable housing. Community say that's still not good enough, so the campaign goes on. But the point is that whatever happens, there's going to be more affordable housing. And that community campaign created the political space in which something different could happen. So what's special about community-led housing? Well, it's a direct witness for policy and market failure people are experiencing. People are very preoccupied with genuine and permanent affordability for their community there. It's also about people taking some sense of responsibility and having a long-term vision about what they want their place to be like and having the means to do it. As you said, about just making the whole process of physical and social change more human. I think people feel so alienated by the pace and the distance between them and people in power. And then to come back to better together. There are things here which the state and the citizen can do that neither can do on their own. And I'll just say a bit more about that in a moment. And communities are disruptors. We're trying to do things that other people won't do or possibly even can't do. So most of the innovation in housing, I would say, is actually coming from the community sector right now. Now, I'm just going to do a little bit of sort of slightly boring stuff. This is a community land trust. This is a legal definition of community land trust. And I was really surprised that the Labour report didn't really mention it. That's one tiny mention in the footnote. And I think part of this, Labour does have a problem with community land trusts. It was in legislation that they authored in 2008, but they really didn't want to accept this amendment. And I'm not entirely sure why. It will take another whole evening to discuss this. We won't. But the point about it is that you will not see the words housing or affordable housing anywhere in this definition. So it's not a model of affordable housing. It's a political idea about land ownership in the public interest. That's what it is about. So a community land trust must be an organisation that's set up specifically to further the economic, social and environmental interests of the local community. Now, it should have said well-being, because then that would exactly replicate the functions of local authorities and also the function of the planning system. The parliamentary draft said, oh, we can't do that because that's what they do. And we said, but that's what we want to do as well. No, it's got to be interest. Having got your assets, you can only use them for that purpose. And then you have to be an open membership local organisation, locally accountable. And these are really important. And that's what you're trying to do is you're trying to change the way the land market works in your area. Central government and local government never tried to do this. So who are we, community, doing this? We have to give ourselves some kind of legitimacy to make that possible. If you look at the way the government do it, so shortly after this, that was in 2008, 2011 we had the Localism Act, the government's attempt to evolve more to the communities. Parliamentary Glaston had been really tricky about CLT definition. They had to come up with a legal definition of an organisation that could promote community work, which is basically an organisation that gives itself planning permission for the scheme. Apart from the words interest and well-being, it's exactly the same. So somebody in the Parliamentary Glaston office thought, oh, here's a good thing. This is a government-sponsored thing, and you'll notice that there have only been about 3 or 4 community since 2011. If you just go back to the previous slide. On the previous slide, you might have noticed up in the top right-hand corner, the number of community land trusts, most of which have been formed in the last 3 years, is 317. You might draw your own conclusions about things that are initiated by the citizens and things that are initiated by the state. These are things which are shared by all models of community. And crucially, it's about communities being sufficiently autonomous to do things on their own account, but also to have some kind of accountability for doing it. And that's a really important idea, because politicians get very nervous about citizens exercising power. So community organising is a very powerful model, a lot of it in the States, London Community Land Trust in London, and some of the other community housing organisations. And the real purpose, this is words I took from a paper by Luke Brereton, who was one of the founding members of Citizens UK before going to the States. And it is about real people power requires coordinated common action around all the things that are important to us, and you need existing forms of institution, but also new self-generating institutions, which community housing is one. And citizens have that ability to uphold that sort of common good life much more effectively than any other institution. These are things that local and national government cannot do, but we can do these things at a local level. In the States, at a big conference when I was there in 2014, it was really interesting at the National CLT conference there. There were very active community organisers, quite radical people, Take Back the City. But what we were all thinking about is that the people who we've always thought of as being very marginal and most vulnerable have everything now in common with the threatened middle classes. And I know that one of the things that is in question is how do we make sure that marginal people have as much access as the middle classes seem to do. I think it's really important that we don't try and create differences, is we try and find commonalities so that we work together. Neil was talking a lot about democracy. I think this is really important. Rory Stewart, who's now Minister for Prisons, but he's in a rural constituency in Cumbria where there are a lot of community land trusts, and he's written very thoughtfully about the state of our democracy and how impoverished it is. He's saying there is no power anywhere really, so we have to reinvent new localised institutions of participation. And Lisa Nandi probably regretting she got into that particular post in that paragraph. Also saying, putting people back in control. This means there is just not one right way of doing things. And I would have to say, bear in mind where I am, is that sometimes dealing with local authorities, there is a very strong sense that theirs is the right way, and doing things in different ways is not really what they want to do. And yet, you can see that START project is that the mayor has now got another 400 homes that he wouldn't have otherwise had. That's a really big gain for the political system. So my kind of plea is politicians and citizens working together can do amazing things. There are some problems, issues that do need to be dealt with at a very practical level. First four of these are all about money and access to land. Crucially, the power of established corporate interests, the thing that Neil was talking about, and people who think, what communities do, getting involved with this stuff. This is what we do. And I think also this very distinct political reserve about what I call the personalisation of action for basic needs. People coming together and say, we want to house ourselves, but you're not on the waiting list. So I think there's a real political conundrum there about how do you square those particular things. So my kind of thought about this is, our homes are not your assets. I think I'd like to say to the bankers and those people is, we are not your assets. So I'm going to give the sword to Neil again. Are you going to fight to ensure you do not become one of their assets?
Yes.
And we will. Will you fight?
Yes!
And
we will fight with you! Let's get going.
Thanks, Stephen. That was a really interesting take on community-led housing and all the potential that it holds. And what we want to do now is raise some questions that have come out of Richard, our researcher's research so far, and put the questions to our two panel members and also throw it open to you to comments and suggestions and questions. We've got 4 questions and we'll see how many of them we get through, and we'll see whether we stay on topic. But I think the questions touch on a lot of the issues that have been raised by all 3 of us so far. And the first one is about the fact that, especially in this country, as probably a lot of us are aware, a lot of community-led housing initiatives have been driven by white middle-class people. And so what we're trying to think about with our research is how can the community-led housing movement and its support and financing structures embed a stronger culture of diversity and inclusivity within itself, including in relation to becoming more accessible in areas which are experiencing some type of deprivation, such as a lot of the areas in Greater Manchester where we're working. So I don't know if one of you wants to start with that, just like a couple of minutes, any thoughts?
I need a rest. You go first.
I kind of forgot about those questions, so it's kind of, they sent it to an email. I'm not a housing person, but I would say, generally speaking here, is that there's a dissonance and problem we have in England, and I'm saying England purposely, in that there's something about the language we use. I think the way that Market Liberals worked, it's managed to divide people, yeah. And I think there's something about the language we use. I think there's something about the sense of how we think we make change. I think we've got to listen a lot more. I think we've got to think about the land use, listen more, and genuinely try to co-design and co-produce things in a genuine way. I think for too long people have had things done to them. I think you've got to get down and double and start to actually listen and engage with people before you can start to think you mobilise. Nothing more to say, no, let's get, this is a problem for you, let's go. I would put a parallel with the Common Weal movement in Scotland, which is a citizens movement, and that was an amazing movement that helped with the independence movement. It's a progressive movement for lots of aspects of Scotland. But what Common Weal did really cleverly, it spent a lot of time just going into communities. It was academics, it was middle classes, it was think tanks, it was politicians who said, we're not going to prejudge stuff here. We're going to get out there and start to do stuff. And so they mobilised lots of people. I went to a town hall meeting in Tyndrum, which is near from in Scotland. There was like 300 people there. Do you know what I mean? Talk about a particular issue. So there's something about the means of how we engage that's really important. And listening, I think, is a key start point to that.
I think it's important not to overstate the kind of classroom. And I think there are two things I want to say about that. One is that for housing as an issue, we've got very used to the idea that we have to rely on the state as a market. You know, those are the primary choices we've got. The National Community Land Trust Network got a doctoral student to do some research on the street. She was working on system design. How do people get, if they want to do community housing, how do they find out about it? How do they go through the process? And one of the things she just did was to go out on a rush hour on commuter line stations all around London and ask people, what are you looking for in your housing? And she said, lo and behold, they want all the things that you're offering. They've got no idea who you are, they've got no idea you exist, they don't even know it's a possible choice. So just raising the awareness that there are other ways of doing this is really important. And I think, to be fair, this government and the last have done a not too bad job in doing that, in making it a bit more of a political issue with self-bill and custom bill, getting the idea across, and there are quite a few MPs in Parliament on all sides who are saying house builders are just so diminishing our choices that we have to encourage other ways of doing it. But the other thing, and it comes back to my point about community housing, community organising, is that organisations like London Citizens, they have lots of member organisations. That's how they're based. They're a federation of other civil society organisations, which will be schools, credit unions, mosques, churches, places where all sorts of people from all walks of life meet. And the work that they do is to conduct listening campaigns, hear what concerns people, and then try to turn those into campaigns which they can take to business, politics, but crucially then educating people in their community to be their community leaders, to lead on these things from an informed perspective. And in London, they've done two things. One, historically, was the London Living Wage. So members of all these different organisations, that was their key priority. We're not paid enough to live in London. So the London Living Wage campaign is born, develops into a campaign that takes to employers, persuades them to pay their worst paid people a proper wage so they can live in London. They don't have to do it. Maybe they have to do 2 jobs rather than 3 or 4. And it was very effective. And then when it was going, they could take that to the mayor and to other politicians and say, we want you to endorse this. Now, politicians would never have started a campaign. They would never have gone to businesses saying, you need to pay your people more. But communities and citizens can do this, and then they can get the state to endorse it. And now it's accepted right across London. Local authorities and GLA, people work for them, they have to pay them. And it's now a kind of badge of honour for many businesses to be shown to be a living wage employer. When it gets commandeered by central government and they turn it into something else, it's not so good. That's another story. And housing is the same. So London Citizens started off wrong campaign, it goes back to the Olympics. Crucially, they were saying people should be able to afford a home paying no more than a third of their income. And the model they came up with was an ownership model where you own a mortgage, you have a mortgage on your home, you own 100% of your home, but the price you pay is only based on a third of your income, depending on how many people in your household are earning. And that's the basis on which you sell it as well. So you might buy a home for £140,000, a one-bedroom flat, but the money you'll get back when you sell will be based on how much incomes have risen and not how much the housing market has risen. Now, can you imagine any politician of any party, Greens possibly accepted, saying, we've got this great idea, you can buy a house, but you're not going to make any money on it. Not a great political winner. But the citizens say, this is what we want. The things we're interested in, the security and certainty of our outcomes. That's all we want. We don't want to make money. But all the things that Rebecca was talking about, your children in the local school, you've got a local doctor, you know your neighbours, those are things. And citizens can do this. And I think that way of engaging people from a much broader social spectrum through those member institutions is probably one of the best ways. So if you're thinking about trying to start a group, and even if you are middle-class people starting off, go to all the other institutions in your area and find, people joining clubs and all sorts of things, all walks of life. Find those people and bring them in and get them talking about life.
I'll say one other thing very quickly. I think we've got to be very careful. We've got to be very careful in those different housing markets across the country, and that we shouldn't throw the baby out the bathwater. I think community-led housing has a role to play, but so does council housing. Yeah, and the problem is that councils are not building enough housing, and that means there's not enough housing subsidy for them to do so. So I think we need to be plural in all its forms and not just focus on one particular thing. And the problem we've got of housing, the big solution will be councils building more social housing.
And I think it's interesting with the START campaign, they started off thinking we've got to find a way of being developed this project, and they're really big ask. Now it's got to the stage it has, got a new council, Labour Council in Haringey. They said, well, we'd like to buy completed homes off this development. And then we've got the City of Corporation, who also have to build affordable homes to meet their mayoral targets. They say, well, we'll buy some affordable homes too. So you are beginning to get people saying, we can create council housing on this estate. Somebody needs to build them because we don't have the resources to do that, but we'll buy the completed homes.
Thanks for that. Are there any perspectives from the Manchester end of the country?
Hi, I want to ask a rather practical question around this.
Could I ask you to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name's Nigel Rose. I work for MAC, which is a voluntary sector infrastructure organisation for Manchester. I'm also a resident of Chorlton in South Manchester. A rather practical question, which is, I was speaking to a chief executive of a housing association about a month ago, who was saying that they wanted to build more social housing. The problem was that they couldn't afford the land. And the reason they couldn't afford the land was that London investors are now investing in Manchester because the returns are much greater. They're now up to 8% in Manchester, which is a fantastic rate of return on capital at the moment. So my rather practical question is, where do we get the money? Where do residents or communities or anyone else get the money to purchase the land?
Yeah.
I'll take three questions and then.
That's quite a big question.
Are you okay to pause it?
I think just to take that one.
Okay.
Yeah, you start first. I don't think it's a big question, actually. Sorry. I think it's quite simple in that we need a proper land control, and we need proper investment in public bodies that can purchase land. I think the idea that the land, the very nature of England's green and pleasant land, is open to speculation and use by anyone. It's the commons. It's there. And there's certain bits of our cities and our places that need to be seen as the commons and treated in that way, and that's taken it out of the aggressive market that sees land speculation that way. Where you start with, I think you can see, and it's happening a bit in London, in central London, isn't it? Trying to buy land and property to kind of slow the juggernaut down. I would think that the combined authority, if it was supported properly in Greater Manchester through subsidy from the state, should start to buy up land and keep them in perpetuity as commons for the people for their use.
But if they're going to do that, they will still nevertheless have to buy it. And so one of the bits of the slowing the juggernaut is saying we've had a period of about 20-25 years now in which the property market has been driven primarily by the available of huge amounts of debt finance. Actually, in this market, that's becoming more and more difficult. And it's very interesting how many developers, both here in Manchester and in London, are turning to build to rent because they can access a wholly different sorts of funding, longer term equity funding. And although in the short term, it still means that those investors are having to meet the expectations of land price that's driven by short term debt financing. The thing is that you can then pay for that over 50, 60 or even more years if you choose. So it is a way you can get sufficient weight of equity money into the market. You could begin to have a dampening effect on the way in which land is traded, not least because that land isn't coming back onto the market anytime soon. I had a meeting this morning with a German investment bank, and they're saying, we could help you. At the moment you're entirely dependent on getting some kind of soft deal for one way or another, on public land or something like that. Or you're part of the Section 106 requirement, so you're getting some kind of discount against the land. They said there are investors who don't want their money back for 60 years. We could help you buy the land, and you have two options. You can kind of securitize it. So somebody buys the land, somebody helps you raise the money for the bricks and mortar. That amortizes over quite short-term periods. Your income is still continuing to flow. You can pay for your land over a much, much longer period. But I agree with Neil. In the longer term, we have to have a wholly different way of thinking about land being for the common good. And that is why, in our own pathetic little way, that definition is really important. It's the only thing on the statute book which describes in any sense at all land being held for the common good.
It's a really good points, and it made me think that it seems to me this is where planning comes in, and it seems to me that if there's land and there's valuable land that's seen for particular purposes, there's no reason why kind of legislation that says a maximum price for that land. I think it's got that serious in terms of the very nature of this land, this country. We need to intervene quite deeply in the market to make the market not rigged in favour of speculators, but rigged in a fair game here. That needs maximum price legislation for certain posts of land, and it has to be. This is the time, we're in this interregnum, it's time to be bold in this sort of stuff.
My name's Jo Bird. I helped to co-found Equinox Housing Co-op in Longsight in the 90s. And now I'm project managing this project, which really chairs the Greater Manchester Co-op and community-led housing project. We're asking, offering for 4 things. We want to support groups. We've got some money from the Greater Manchester Combined Authority to provide direct support for cooperative and housing, community-led housing groups that want to move forward. Particularly if you want to move forward fast, we're here to accelerate and to remove barriers. And then, secondly, we're looking for experienced advisors. We have some who want more experienced advisors who've got some of the know-how because we've done some of the process already before ourselves. So we can help remove barriers, we can get you registered, we can help to find land, and also we can help you to access funding and new money. There's some new money funds from Homes England to support community-led housing that can do pay for feasibility studies. It can also in the future pay for actual purchase of land and property. There's the Housing Investment Fund from Greater Manchester that can help with development finance as well. Thirdly, we're looking for coordination and administration support. So if you're interested in part-time work in this, do let me know. All the details are on the flyer. And fourthly, we'd like photos of your community-led housing with photos of people and places, and we'll pay money for that as well. So please do talk to me or get in touch with the contact details. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Phil President, I'm a resident, that's all. Do you think the word affordable has been devalued to the point where it's actually hampering discussions? And what would you do to replace it, if so?
Yes. Yes. That's 2 yeses.
I'm Sam Whelan, the Labour councillor for Piccadilly, which is the eastern half of the city centre. So I can't afford to live there, so I live in Gorton, which is where I'm from. But it was partially linked to Phil's question. So the affordability level in Manchester is £750 a month. Anything less than that is counted as affordable. And have we got to a stage where it's just not useful as a term when we're talking about affordable housing? And also I want to build some council housing. How can I do it? Thank you.
Okay, should we take one more question or point?
Is it a different question? Is that okay? Or is it in relation to this point you want? I can come back if you want. We've done that one.
No, we take it now.
I'll ask it now then. Okay. Just partly following on from what I heard from Joe there as well, and also the other speakers. My name's Steve Goslin, and I'm part of a group called the Chorlton Community-Led Housing Group. We're just getting started, really. And one of the things I'm interested in is that whole issue of engaging with people around what's important about where they live. And it may be to Joe this, or perhaps the other speakers may want to come back on that. It's just the idea of getting started on that and raising issues, raising awareness really about this is an important conversation that you could make a difference to your own life if you engage in it. I quite like the standing on the railway station idea, but I just wonder if that's something which we could look to from the new hub to give us some sort of some sort of tips and getting started and sharing some ideas around it. Getting the conversation going really is the question.
Yeah. On the rent affordable thing, affordable seems to be a bit silly. I think we need to get back to rent control and fair rent pricing. That seems to be the way to go. In terms of in each area will be different, and I think we need to set what a fair rent would be. In terms of who would afford to build housing, I think that clearly in the absence of government not having proper housing subsidy, as there is actually in Scotland, we need to look very, very seriously at Section 106s and other types of developer input and how we extract more from them. It seems to me we've got very few tools to extract some of that wealth. I think we need to be more vociferous. I do know that in some local authorities, particularly areas that are not that buoyant, there's a suspension of all that sort of developer dividend on the basis because they're scared developers will run away. So I think there needs to be a whole review of when there is development and there is return being made, what would be fair return, and how do we get the local state to extract that wealth, which then in turn would be used to build housing at a fair rate.
I mean, politically, there is very great reluctance to have anything like rent control, and politicians seem to be very enthralled to the Landlords Association saying it'll turn people off renting in the worst way. What's going to happen to the houses? They're still going to be there. Someone's going to live in them.
Sure.
It's kind of, it feels a really silly argument. And politicians have not been strong enough to kind of call it out. Just going back to my kind of London CLT experience, having devised that purchase price and resale price mechanism that's strictly limited to income, it's interesting that the GLA, having viewed community housing as a bit of a kind of oddity and a bit left field, in the Mayor's current programme, they have devised something called the London Living Rent, which draws partly from the idea of the London Living Wage, and also from the idea of not paying more than a third of your household income, which used to be an old-fashioned rule of thumb for council housing. The problem is, the deal they had to strike with government was that although somebody could start by renting at a third of their income, after 10 years, the house had to be bought. And this was a deal in exchange for getting additional resources to go into housing in London, and you see politicians have to make these compromises. Nobody has any idea how it will actually work in year 10. There have been lots of attempts to do this in the past, converting rent to mortgage at a given date. And of course, you can never guarantee that people will be in a position to buy their homes after 10 years. Life changes happen. Partners split up, they've no longer got the means. All these things happen. And so every transaction becomes an individual tale of hardship and difficulty. You're on a political road to nowhere trying to make these things work. And the other problem is that housing associations are reckoning that they discount the price for 10 years, but they're assuming that whatever happens, that house will go out into the market. Either the occupier will buy it, or they'll turf the occupier out, and somebody else will buy it. So the price they pay at the front end for the land is almost exactly the same as they would if they were buying to develop it and sell it now. So the government gains nothing for all its input as subsidy. It's complete. But it's interesting that they borrowed that idea, I would say, directly from the work of London citizens, both on the London living component and setting the housing cost at a third of household income. I mean, that's not a unique measure, but when I was at college, it was a kind of standard universal measure of a sensible amount of money people to be paying on their housing costs. I think that the getting people involved, I think getting people together around almost anything is simply a way of starting conversations. Put the tables out in your street once a month, get people to come along and share their food, and start talking about the things that are important. I think it really is difficult, but people in local authorities often find it really difficult because they think that there are methodologies that employ expensive consultants. It's actually the easiest thing to get people to start on talking, provide them with a kind of social setting, and just find out what's important to people, and then very quickly identify an agenda, and then you've got something to work with. It's like the listening campaigns. What is the most thing that's most important? What's worrying you most? Go for it. Have fun. It's got to be fun, because otherwise people won't come.
Honestly, I think this housing, everything's connected, isn't it? I don't want to get maybe too complex, but it seems to be that there's something about is housing an investment in to create productive people and to create good society, or is it an investment that's got to play within the market and the economy? It seems to me that we need to think about housing as part of an investing in people's lives to be productive within the economy, but it's actually part of that whole thing. It's seen as a kind of commodity. And also in terms of the whole housing issue, it kind of goes back to wages and how much wealth people have in people's pockets. It's in the sense that they've got more money in their pockets, then they can afford different types of rent.
So Neil, you talked about the need, obviously, for more social housing and state-provided housing in addition as well as a kind of major need alongside community-led alternatives. But what is the scope for embedding a kind of community-led ethos into new social housing, or even into existing housing associations and council housing through? Because there has been the kind of process of asset transfer to communities in the past. I don't think we're seeing much of that at the moment. But is that something that you would want to see more of? And to what extent could it be seen as simply passing on responsibility for governance and maintenance of assets, common assets, onto unpaid local residents who have other demands on their time? Because a lot of the time it's the two facing against each other. To what extent is community housing potentially part of the answer of creating more social housing?
I mean, from a practical policy point of view, I mean, from a practical sense, where do you start? Is always an interesting question for me in terms of where to begin to try and create social progress and change. And it seems to me that community asset transfer particularly is one of those ones that seems like a good idea, but in an era of austerity and in an era of where it actually becomes a means to pass the buck. Yeah. So it seems like a good idea, but actually because of the context, it's starting in the wrong place. So until we have a recognition that housing is a necessity, and until we recognise that as a nation we need to invest in housing, and that might require subsidy to some extent, we're kind of dancing on the head of a pin if we come in at it with these sort of small-scale stuff. It'll go rogue. It'll become contorted. So, in terms of where you start, I think there needs to be that first recognition, and it needs to be pushed from below in terms of movement. And it's saying we need to start looking seriously at housing as an investment and seeing it as a necessity and as part of what we are as a good society. How do we get more subsidy for council housing, for community housing, for community-led housing, for a whole range of different plurality of forms? That's the battle we're at right now. It's like Stephen's sword. What do we need to skewer? The skewer is the idea that housing needs to play dance on the top of a rampaging, rapacious economy. Yeah, that doesn't work for people. We need to skewer that first, it seems to me. Otherwise, we'll end up in a elastoplastic short-term fixes that will fail. In community asset transfer across the UK, I think there's been some good examples, but by and large, it's passing the buck.
Grenfell Tower is an example, isn't it? Such a asset transfer. I thought the Grenfell Tower is an example of supposedly tenant-managed.
Complicated story. I think probably for another day. I've also got a take on community asset transfer because it was a very strong element of New Labour's second administration, and it was going on in parallel with David Miliband's double devolution agenda. And the double devolution agenda was about central government devolving things to local government, but local government also devolving things to communities. And I had a terrible experience. These are one of the kind of life-searing moments that you never ever forget. I was on, Nick Rainsford was Minister of Local Government, and he had a kind of signing board on the local government forum. For some reason I was on it as a kind of voice of the community. So not a community, I'm a professional surveyor, but myself and another on board, we were given the job of trying to articulate what this second stage of devolution looked like. And I can remember May the 22nd, 2005, at 2:30 in the afternoon, finished the presentation, and the voice of local government on the other side of the table said, turning to Nick Rainsford, for God's sake, don't make our job any more difficult than it is by making us work with communities. And that was that. At the same time, so this was about real transfers of power from central to local, from local to community. That was the important thing, power transfer. Community asset transfer, to me, at the time, felt like a huge diversion. And there were voluntary sector organisations really wanting to get involved, clearly wanting to do good projects. But one of the fundamental things about development trusts is that they don't intrinsically have any necessary or legal obligation to be accountable to their communities. And Joseph Ramsey Foundation did a lot of work on asset transfer and found that as a kind of a generic type of community development trust, there was nothing intrinsic to it about being accountable to their communities, which is why, again, the definition of community land by people in the Land Trust for this, but that's what I think. I think it was a great missed opportunity, and I think it's really important. So there's things that both Rory Stewart and Lisa Manning are talking about, is we have to invent new local institutions of democratic accountability that are not local authorities, but they are about participating democracy to do things that are important to the lives.
I agree with that. I think there's something balance here. It's a very important point, I think, in that there's something quite ironic. I was brought up in a tide house in a part of a landed estate, and then I went to a council house for 10 years. And I think we need to understand that the very rich don't really get involved in they just get somebody else to buy a house for them, and then they get somebody else to move in the house, and they've got that house and it's all paid for. It's all sorted. Yeah. I don't really see why the poorest members, or people that, some people just want a house. Why do they have to get involved to have a house? So we need to watch, and we need to get a balance right here. I think people should have a house. They can get involved if they want to set up community-led houses, if they want to do that. But some people won't. And I think the most would just like, give us a house at a decent price. Yeah. I don't want to get involved. I'm too busy watching the football and going to the pub, right? Or doing something else. Right? So I think there's something about it's a right to have a house, and I don't think we should force people necessarily to go down a community. You've got to get involved in this. Yeah. I think that's unfair. I think we need to get back to a situation where a house like this, a thing you get, but you're allowed to have it and don't get involved.
My name's Daisy Martin. I'm a member of Manchester Urban Co-housing, which is an older people's co-housing group in Manchester. And I think one of the issues for us as older people is that a house is not just bricks and mortar, and it's not something that it's not the only thing we need. We see ourselves as active citizens, and we have ambitions and aspirations for the next 30 years of our lives, perhaps, maybe more, if we're lucky, to play roles in our communities, which we are already playing and continue to do so. And what we're looking for is the opportunity to live in a way which enables us to support each other and to develop services for ourselves and for a wider community within our local area. And the bringing together process, which you talked about, is something that we're trying to do in order to do that through the co-housing model. And we've been going now for 5 years, and we are in South Manchester, which is boom town. Property prices are rocketing. I don't live in Chorlton, I live in the other bit that's getting very expensive. And there isn't much land, and the property developers are getting in there before us, and despite our working relationships with housing associations, who I have to say vary considerably. Some of them have got a very narrow view, and particularly the ones managing ex-council stock, who are very patronising view of older people, who want to care for us. We don't want to be cared for, we want to live our lives, and that may involve getting care. And we think we can probably get a better model of care that is currently, or is likely to be in place by the time I get to need it. So we're stuck in a difficult position where we have a lot of things in place, but we need more, and particularly it's the issue that Nigel talked about at the back about doing something about getting access to land, which is in the right place, because the concept in the housing world of ageing in place. I've lived in my house for 35 years. I don't want to live miles and miles away just because I happen to be old and want to live in a particular way. And most of the people in the group are in the same position. So I think it's a complicated issue at one level, but another level it's a very simple issue because it could become quite a radical solution, not just for owner-occupiers, which I am, but for people who want rented accommodation, which we want to incorporate, which also complicates the thing because people can't get their head around managing two models in the same space. So I just wonder whether anybody in the room's got any answers to the simple questions about how do we get the right land in the right place.
Have you got any answers in the room to that question?
I'll pay money for it.
You can have this for free. I mean, I'm chair of the co-housing network, so this is an issue that very much preoccupies us, and not least because lots of the co-housing groups are in areas which are kind of hot markets, but equally there are lots of parts of the country that I was talking about earlier, where there's been kind of long-term decline, but there are still people who would be interested in this kind of mutual support in their older age. And of course, what we often think about is, because it doesn't exist, we've got to go out and build it. But I think the key is, it's not just about the bricks and mortar, it's about the social relationships that make all this work. So there are a couple of co-housing groups that are basically trying to use the principles of co-housing, but to try and adopt those as much as they can in places where they already live, or where it might be easier for people to move towards a place where you could all be quite close, and then through your own social interconnections, you can replicate some of the things that you get from living in a purpose-built development. Doing a new purpose-built development is about the most difficult thing you can do, as every community housing group has discovered. And therefore, if there are other ways in which the co-housing way of life can be retrofitted into existing situations, I mean, we're at a really early stage, so there are no magic answers to this, but I think it is something that people increasingly think about, or even people who think, I'd really like to live in a new purpose-built scheme, but it's going to take forever. I'm going to be far too old by the time I get there. Therefore, let's try and do something now. And I think the trap that we tended to fall into is because those social forms of connectivity don't naturally exist or have been very fragmented. If we build a building and then fit the building with those social connections, that's the way to do it. Whereas maybe we should be starting on how do we build on those social connections. The people you've been working with alongside for 5 years, and like the Older Women's Co-housing Group, before they even got anywhere near having a building, they were doing all kinds of mutual support activities, caring for each other. So I think it's not a very perfect answer, but it's kind of, we just have to try lots of different ways of doing that kind of more neighbourly way of aging together.
I'm happy to continue our conversation one-to-one on this question as well, but some groups do need land and property, and I think there's 3 sources. One is publicly owned land and property. Greater Manchester Combined Authority knows of thousands of plots of land that it already owns, and is some of which it will be looking to sell to community-led groups, and not necessarily sell at market rate, so at social, when social value can be added, the price can be cheaper. There's privately owned land and property, and some are already approaching this project, so we hope to broker conversations with people who want to sell a house that they no longer want all the plot of land to a community-led group. And third sector owned land and property, so churches apparently are working with Shelter to look at land that they can release to community-led groups for social and affordable housing.
Any other questions?
I'm not sure whether the questions are based on the one you originally asked, because we seem to be free-flowing, so I thought I'd just nip in. A couple of things I'll comment on what was said earlier about Dublin, Manchester and Salford councils. Well, I know it's the system, but I do think Manchester and Salford councils have not resisted it as well as some others. and maybe Salford's changing a bit at the moment. I hope Manchester does soon, but we have had massive investment of, you know, money from the Far East, etc. And that's been encouraged. Richard Rees goes to Cannes and woos you know, the Middle Eastern investors. You know, Manchester's paraded, and Salford was, I don't know if it still is, as the place to come. And you look, you know, we've got the donut effect. We had the report out last week that none of it's helped your average person. It's just helped the investors and a few people who can afford them. And there must be zillions of empty flats, as well as the ones that are used by party weekends, etc. It's not a healthy housing situation from any point of view. So I think, you know, they have some responsibility and they have not used it well. But my question was, going back to something that was said early on by one of the speakers about, you know, hospitals having some sort of responsibility. And I was thinking, sorry, I'm Margaret Mann, I'm also involved now with this community-led housing thing in Charlton, which is a slightly different thing from what other people might think of as community-led housing. It's just a name we adopted, and then we found out there's a whole movement which might or might not be the same as what we want to do. But I am interested in lots of aspects of housing, eco-housing in particular. But the public institutions in Manchester in particular have a responsibility. So you've got the big hospitals, you've got 2 universities, the Royal College of Music, maybe some other colleges, who skew the housing market in a lot of ways. You know, the students take over certain areas, they build student flats, but they've also, in building their campuses, taken over, especially MMU recently, a whole chunk of Hugh that was social housing, so they've had very cheap land. So I think what we need to do is get them as part of their community responsibility, because they, as we know from the groups that are here, universities have lots of departments doing research, projects on, you know, age-friendly living and this research and that research, but when it comes to them as an institution, do they think of putting the money where their mouths are? Well, up to now it doesn't seem so. You know, I mean, that development where the big VC was, I don't know who actually owns it, whatever, but that's all going to be student land, from what I can gather. Well, why should it be? You know, what's wrong with it? What would have been wrong with some of that being for, you know, people who would have otherwise lived in Hume or somewhere like that? So I think, you know, one way or another, these institutions, I know they're private, independent, blah, 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 but, you know, they are still public in a way that, you know, Amazon isn't, shall we say. So I think we ought to get to them as well and say, you have a responsibility to the community, you want to be seen as, you know, people and not just businesses, or some of them do, some of them probably don't, and therefore try and get them to take some responsibility on what's going on in the area as a whole, and not just their own narrow interests in housing the students and, you know, teaching the students and whatever it is that, you know, that they're involved in at the moment.
Yeah, that was a lovely comment. Excellent. I agree. I think Council Salford, Manchester, others could have done a lot more. I think it was like started off all this back in the 80s, I think, where Manchester, this city was, where they adopted an urban entrepreneurialism to make themselves friendly to capital investment. It was maybe possibly not a bad idea then in terms of where Manchester was. It's just that they held on to that idea too long, it seemed to me. And when it started to become more buoyant, they should have turned around and actually looked more at social and economic justice. In my view, they've been a bit late, but I think there's an opportunity now to start to change that, and I think they are changing. Maybe a bit of a juggernaut super tanker, but I think maybe it was a necessity, some of that you know, civic boosterism they did, yeah. But we're past that now. It ended up like sort of mini sort of London. The agglomeration economics went too far, and I think they don't want to make the mistake of London. I think sometimes we kind of Manchester wants to ape London. Can we not have more social justice frame to our land and property and development? That's what we should be doing as a progressive city. On the public institutions and universities, I completely agree with you. If you look at the universities, certainly the big ones in this city region, I'll name them, University of Manchester, it talks big hoo-ha about its corporate social responsibility, yeah, and it does a lot of good philanthropic stuff in terms of work with the community voluntary sector. But the real levers it can pull, yeah, it's land and property and investments, yeah. What's it doing with that, yeah, in terms of to benefit the poorer parts of this city? There's academics in those institutions who give it big hoo-ha being progressive, but they're not really getting at the Vice-Chancellor or influence the deans about how they should be conducted. They're very well being politically right on in their academic papers, but are they really getting right into the entrails of the exploitative, speculative practices of their own institution? So I completely agree with you. The Enlightened universities, like the University of Birmingham, for instance, who are doing some work, the Vice-Chancellor's well behind this sort of stuff in terms of wealth building and the University of Birmingham being a virtuous thing. I'm not really sure the universities in this sense, certainly the University of Manchester in that space.
I mean, I think there's one good example of a university doing that. So UCL in London was going. UCL in London, I think it's called. Was going. The State Department were going to buy a council estate of Newham Council that is on the edge of the Olympic Park in order to build a new campus at Stratford. This is called the Carpenter's Estate, and if you Google Carpenter's Estate, you'll see this has been a battle going on between the community and Newham Council, and the late lamented and much missed Mayor Robin Wales.
By some.
Trying to empty this estate over the best part of 15 years and never quite succeeded. So there were then academics and indeed students in the planning school who were completely horrified with this, because basically the university was doing exactly the thing that all the teaching was saying should never happen. And in the end, that kind of pressure told, and the university withdrew. But in a sense, it was not evil intent. It was simply that the property people had no idea of what these sensitivities were. To them, it was just another bit of real estate. They have lots of money to spend because they sit on a pile of real estate in a very valuable part of central London. So they're completely divorced from the value set of the university. And the governance of the university is simply insufficient to make sure that this sort of thing never happens.
I think we've got time for one more point. There was somebody with a hand up at the back there.
Hi, my name is Gauthier. I've been involved in a few community-led housing projects, mostly with co-ops all over the country. I just wanted to make a comment, like a more of a general comment, which I think is relevant to the risk and opportunities of alternative ownership model. It's the fact that when we talk about community-led housing, it's quite a diverse sector with a lot of different models, and also we can value the diversity. I also think because we do relate that movement to like the common ownership of assets, to things like affordability, to grassroots control of housing, and grassroots and democratic control of housing, I think it's important to understand how those different models actually lead to different social implications. And while it's good to kind of value the diversity, I think we shouldn't also fall into the trap of using any kind of model that at the moment are under the umbrella of community-led housing, because I think we've been through a phase of experimenting with new models, and there are particular models of ownership and governance which do guarantee like long-term affordability, that do guarantee grassroots and democratic control of housing by the occupants, and also mostly that prevent any form of financialization of housing assets. And I kind of think we should try to really understand which model should be promoted depending on what aim we are in, because there's a difference between privately owned co-housing models than say cooperative co-housing models. And that leads to a second slide comment, is that like across the board when I work with other community-led organizations, we often compare things like co-ops or community land trusts with something like co-housing. And because the area is so diverse, I think we need to be clearer about our messages. And actually, talking about community, like co-housing, is actually about the physical aspect of the housing project, is how housing are placed together. Whereas something like co-ops and community land trust is about the ownership and governance of the property and the land. And actually, a co-housing project isn't something on its own. It's a co-housing is going to be either incorporated as a co-op or a CLT or privately owned. But I think it's quite important to start to clearly make those differences when we talk about community-led housing.
Thanks, Gautier. I think that was a really good point to end on. The Housing Futures project is looking at all the different forms of community housing and trying to make sense of them for an audience of people who are interested in reforming the housing sector in Manchester, in Greater Manchester. And we're trying to see like what models, what to lay out, what exactly all of these models mean and how they could work in Manchester. At the same time, bringing people together who have this knowledge and expertise and interest through the network. And I think gradually we'll start to see like where initiatives can support one another and gradually spread this awareness we've been talking about to different communities that are currently not thinking in terms of housing as a solution to some of the wider problems that they're facing, economic and social problems that we're facing as a city region. But start to see how kind of more democratic control can come into the housing aspects of our lives. But also, as you've seen today, like, kind of covered all of the issues and problems with the housing market. And I think the Greater Manchester Housing Action, which works on that cares about homelessness and asset stripping and all of the things that that are making life kind of harder for so many people. With this community-led housing topic is kind of one that we've embraced because it has some positive solutions in there, and it kind of has some avenues for hope, and it kind of brings together the sort of wider desire that we're seeing in society for greater local power and empowerment and working together and transfer of ownership to community. So hopefully the conversation we're going to carry on with. We're going to be looking at what community-led housing means in African countries and in other countries in the global south at our next event, because there's so much that we can learn from how it works there, where it's a really big part of the housing sector. And then our launch event, when the report will be finished, will be like a wider conversation that we're trying to bring back a lot of these issues, and hopefully a lot of you as well, to see how we can build a strong community-led housing